Captain Sarah Chen stood at the back of the military academy's briefing room, watching her classmates receive their first assignments. At 19, she was the youngest cadet in the history of the Terran Defense Academy, but that achievement meant nothing to her peers. They saw only a small girl who barely reached most of their shoulders. "Chen, Sarah," the instructor called out, his voice carrying across the silent room. "You've been assigned to the Outer Rim patrol ship Defiance." The room erupted and barely contained snickers. The Outer Rim was where they sent washouts and discipline cases. It was the military equivalent of exile, a place where careers went to die among the endless void between star systems. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. She had expected this. "Sir, yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite the heat burning in her chest. As the other cadets filed out, chattering excitedly about their prestigious assignments to flagship vessels and core world defenses, Sarah remained behind. The instructor, Colonel Martinez, approached her with something that might have been sympathy in his eyes. "Chen, I want you to know this wasn't my decision," he said quietly. "Your test scores are off the charts. Your tactical simulations are some of the best I've ever seen. But the brass thinks you're too young, too inexperienced for real command." Sarah nodded, understanding the unspoken message. In a military that valued tradition and seniority above all else, her rapid advancement had made enemies. The old guard didn't appreciate a teenager showing up their carefully groomed protégés. "I understand, sir," she said. "I won't let you down." Martinez smiled grimly. "I don't think you could if you tried, kid. But out there on the rim, you're going to face things the Academy never prepared you for. The Zephyrian Empire has been pushing deeper into our territory every month. Their scouts are getting bolder. The Zephyrians were humanity's greatest threat, an ancient empire that had conquered dozens of species across the galaxy. They viewed humans as primitive upstarts, barely worthy of notice except as potential slaves. For 3 years, there had been border skirmishes and probing attacks, but nothing approaching full-scale war. Sarah packed her few belongings in her cramped academy dormitory. Her roommate Patricia watched with unconcealed relief. Patricia had made no secret of her belief that Sarah didn't belong here, that her rapid advancement was some kind of political stunt. "Finally getting what you deserve," Patricia muttered, not quite under her breath. "Maybe now the rest of us can get the recognition we've earned." Sarah didn't respond. She had learned long ago that defending herself only made things worse. Instead, she focused on the small hologram on her desk, a picture of her parents taken before the mining accident that had left her an orphan. They had believed in her when no one else would. Their memory was worth more than the approval of people like Patricia. The transport to the Outer Rim took 2 weeks, jumping through a series of increasingly isolated star systems. Sarah spent the time reviewing everything she could find about the Defiance and its crew. The ship was old, a Resilience-class destroyer that had seen better decades. Its crew had a reputation for being difficult, made up of misfits and troublemakers who couldn't cut it in the main fleet. When she finally arrived at Outpost Gamma, the staging area for Rim patrol ships, Sarah got her first look at the Defiance. The ship hung in space dock like a wounded bird, its hull scarred from countless micrometeor impacts and the occasional skirmish with pirates. Maintenance crews swarmed over its exterior, making repairs that looked more like battlefield patches than proper maintenance. The crew was waiting for her in the airlock, and their expressions ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, a grizzled veteran with cybernetic implants replacing his left arm, looked her up and down with obvious disdain. "This is our new captain?" he asked Lieutenant Commander Brooks, the ship's executive officer. "Command's really scraping the bottom of the barrel now." Brooks, a thin man with prematurely gray hair, shrugged. "Orders are orders, Chief. Captain Chen, welcome aboard the Defiance." Sarah stepped forward, meeting each crew member's gaze in turn. She could feel their judgment, their assumption that she would be just another inexperienced officer playing at command while they did the real work. "I know what you're thinking," she said, her voice carrying despite her small stature. "You're wondering what a kid like me is doing commanding a warship. You're right to wonder. I'm 19 years old and I've never seen real combat. But I graduated top of my class in tactics and strategy. I've spent the last 4 years studying every battle humans have ever fought, and every battle our enemies have fought against each other." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I'm not here to make friends or prove I belong. I'm here to keep this ship and this crew alive while we do our job. If you can work with that, we'll get along fine. If you can't, request a transfer." The crew exchanged glances, clearly not impressed by her speech. Rodriguez snorted and turned away, muttering something about academy brats under his breath. Only Brooke seemed willing to give her a chance, nodding slightly in what might have been approval. As the crew dispersed to their duties, Sarah made her way to the captain's quarters. The room was small and spartanly furnished, with barely enough space for a desk, a bed, and a small personal storage locker. The previous captain had left behind only a bottle of cheap whiskey and a note wishing his replacement luck. Sarah sat at the desk and pulled up the ship's patrol schedule on her computer. The Defiance was assigned to patrol a section of space near the contested border, watching for Zephyrian incursions and providing support to the handful of human colonies scattered throughout the region. It was routine work, the kind of assignment given to ships and crews that the military hierarchy considered expendable. But as Sarah studied the tactical reports and intelligence briefings, she noticed patterns that others had missed. The Zephyrian probing attacks weren't random. They were testing human defenses, looking for weaknesses in their formations and response times. It was textbook pre-invasion reconnaissance, the kind of systematic intelligence gathering that preceded every major Zephyrian conquest in their long history. Sarah leaned back in her chair, a cold certainty settling in her stomach. War was coming whether the brass wanted to admit it or not, and when it arrived, ships like the Defiance would be on the front lines, facing an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy while humans were still learning to use fire. She opened a new file on her computer and began typing her first report as captain. If no one else would take the threat seriously, she would make them listen. The Academy might have cast her out to the rim, but they had unknowingly placed her exactly where she needed to be when the storm finally broke. 3 months into her command, Sarah had begun to earn grudging respect from her crew through sheer competence. She knew every system on the ship, had memorized the service records of every crew member, and had instituted training drills that pushed the Defiance's aging systems to their limits. The crew still muttered about their kid captain, but they stopped questioning her orders. The morning everything changed started like any other. The Defiance was on routine patrol near the mining colony of New Hebron, a small settlement that produced rare earth minerals for the Terran military. Sarah was reviewing supply reports when Ensign Patel at the sensor station suddenly straightened. "Captain, I'm detecting multiple contacts entering the system," Patel called out, his voice tight with tension. "Configuration unknown, but they're big." Sarah was on her feet and moving to the bridge before Patel finished speaking. "How many contacts, Ensign?" 12 ships, Captain." "No, wait, 15. They're still coming through the jump point." The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances. 15 ships was far more than the usual pirate raid or smuggling operation. Sarah settled into the captain's chair and activated the main display, studying the sensor readings as they updated in real time. "Mr. Brooks, what's our status with the colony?" Sarah asked her executive officer. "New Hebron has minimal defenses, Captain. A few orbital platforms and a small security force. They're requesting immediate assistance." Sarah studied the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities. The attacking ships were moving in perfect formation, their approach vectors calculated to maximum efficiency. This wasn't a random raid. This was a military operation. "Ensign Patel, can you identify the ship types?" "Negative, Captain. The configurations don't match anything in our database, but energy readings suggest heavy weapons and advanced shielding technology." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Unknown ship types with advanced technology could only mean one thing. "Communications, open a channel to Terran Command." "Priority Alpha." "Channel open, Captain." "Terran Command, this is Captain Chen aboard the Defiance. We have contact with unknown hostile forces at New Hebron, requesting immediate reinforcement." The response came back quickly, crackling with static from the long-range transmission. "Defiance, this is Admiral Reyes. Our nearest ships are 6 hours out. You are ordered to maintain safe distance and observe only." "Do not engage." Sarah felt her jaw clench. 6 hours might as well be 6 days with civilian lives at stake. "Admiral, the colony has no effective defenses. If we withdraw, those people will be slaughtered." "Captain Chen, you have your orders. Maintain distance and report. Command out." The channel closed, leaving Sarah staring at the tactical display. 15 unknown ships were bearing down on a defenseless colony, and she was ordered to watch it happen. She thought of the 3,000 miners and their families on New Hebron, people who had trusted the Terran military to protect them. "Captain." Chief Rodriguez's voice cut through her thoughts. What are your orders? Sarah looked around the bridge at her crew. These were the misfits and rejects that the regular military had cast aside, just like her. But they were also professional soldiers who had sworn an oath to protect human lives. Mr. Brooks, what's the tactical situation if we engage? Brooks consulted his displays. Not good, Captain. 15 ships against 1, and they appear to have superior technology. If we engage, we'll likely be destroyed. But we might buy the colony time to evacuate. Maybe, Captain, maybe. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of command settle on her shoulders. This was the moment that would define not just her career, but who she was as a person. She could follow orders and watch civilians die, or she could violate direct commands and probably get her crew killed in a hopeless fight. Chief Rodriguez, she said quietly, how does the crew feel about long odds? The old veteran smiled grimly. Captain, we've been fighting long odds our whole careers. That's why we're out here instead of sipping tea on the flagships. Sarah nodded and stood up. All hands, this is the captain. In 30 minutes, we're going to engage a superior enemy force to protect civilians. I won't lie to you about our chances, but those people down there are counting on us, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let them down. Man your battle stations. The crew moved with purpose, their earlier skepticism replaced by professional focus. Whatever else they thought about their young captain, she was asking them to fight for something that mattered. As the Defiance accelerated toward the enemy formation, Sarah opened a channel to New Hebron. Colony Control, this is Captain Chen. Begin immediate evacuation procedures. We're buying you time, but I don't know how much. Understood, Captain. Thank you. The first enemy ship opened fire when the Defiance was still at extreme range, particle beams lashing across space with deadly precision. Sarah watched the display as the weapons tracked toward her ship, then smiled as they fell short. Helm, evasive pattern Delta. Weapons lock onto the lead ship and fire when ready. The Defiance's old but reliable plasma cannons spoke, sending bolts of superheated gas streaking toward the enemy. The shots impacted against advanced shields, causing them to flare but not penetrate. Their shields are stronger than expected. Captain, reported Lieutenant Singh from the weapons station. Then we'll have to be smarter, Sarah replied. She studied the enemy formation, noting how they moved in perfect coordination. Mr. Brooks, I think those ships are being controlled by a central command vessel. If we can identify and disable it, the formation might break down, Brooks finished. Good thinking, Captain. For the next hour, the Defiance danced through space using its superior maneuverability to avoid the worst of the enemy fire while striking at targets of opportunity. Sarah's tactical training proved its worth as she identified weaknesses in the enemy formation and exploited them ruthlessly. But despite their best efforts, the Defiance was taking damage. Shield generators overloaded, hull breaches appeared, and crew members were wounded. The enemy ship seemed virtually indestructible, shrugging off weapons fire that should have crippled them. Then Sarah noticed something odd. One ship in the enemy formation was hanging back, protected by the others but not actively engaging. Its energy signature was different, more complex. That's it, she breathed. Weapons, concentrate all fire on the ship at coordinates 127 Mark 15. Everything we have. Captain, that ship has the heaviest shields in the formation, Singh protested. Trust me, Lieutenant, the Defiance unleashed everything in its arsenal. Plasma cannons and missile tubes firing in sequence. The enemy command ship's shields flared and sparked, then suddenly collapsed. Sarah's gamble had paid off. The command vessel had been so focused on controlling the others that it had left itself vulnerable. The moment the command ship was destroyed, the enemy formation fell apart. Ships collided with each other or spun out of control as their coordination systems failed. The remaining vessels retreated toward the jump point, leaving the Defiance battered but victorious. As damage reports came in, Sarah allowed herself a moment of pride. They had saved the colony and proved that even superior technology could be defeated by superior tactics. But her satisfaction was short-lived. Captain, Ensign Patel called out, his voice filled with awe. You need to see this. On the main screen, an image appeared that made Sarah's blood run cold. The wreckage of the command ship was drifting nearby, and clearly visible on its hull was a symbol she recognized from her academy studies, the rising sun emblem of the Zephyrian Empire. The border skirmishes were over. The war had begun, and a 19-year-old captain and her crew of misfits had just fired the first shots in what would become humanity's greatest test. The court-martial proceedings were held aboard the flagship Olympus, humanity's most advanced warship. Sarah stood at attention in the sterile hearing room, her dress uniform bearing no decorations except the basic service ribbons of her short career. Across from her sat 5 senior officers, their faces grim with disapproval. Admiral Reyes, the same man who had ordered her to stand down at New Hebron, leaned forward in his chair. "Captain Chen, you directly disobeyed explicit orders to maintain distance and observe. Your actions endangered your ship and crew for no strategic gain." Sarah kept her voice steady. "Sir, I saved 3,000 civilian lives. The colony's evacuation was successful because we bought them time. And in doing so, you revealed our tactical capabilities to the enemy," shot back Admiral Harrison, a heavy-set man with cold gray eyes. "The Zephyrians now know how our ships perform in combat. You've compromised operational security. With respect, Admiral, the Zephyrians now know that humans will fight for their civilians and that we can defeat superior numbers through superior tactics. I consider that a victory." The admirals exchanged glances, clearly unimpressed with her response. Admiral Reyes shuffled through the reports on his tablet. "Captain, in the 3 days since your engagement, we've lost contact with 4 outer rim colonies. The Zephyrians have accelerated their advance, clearly interpreting your actions as a declaration of war." Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach, but she kept her expression neutral. "Sir, the war was coming whether we fought at New Hebron or not. The Zephyrian fleet movements over the past 6 months clearly indicate preparation for a major offensive. My tactical analysis reports documented this pattern. Reports that were dismissed by command as the overactive imagination of an inexperienced officer," Admiral Harrison said coldly. "Perhaps if you had focused on following orders instead of playing war games, we might have had more time to prepare." The hearing dragged on for hours, with each admiral taking turns to criticize Sarah's judgment, her experience, and her fitness for command. They questioned her tactical decisions, her crew's performance, and even her psychological evaluation scores from the academy. Through it all, Sarah maintained her composure, answering each question with quiet professionalism. Finally, Admiral Reyes stood up. "Captain Chen, this tribunal finds you guilty of disobeying direct orders in a combat situation. However, given the unusual circumstances and the successful outcome of your engagement, we are prepared to offer you a choice." Sarah's heart sank. A choice in a military tribunal was rarely a good thing. You can accept a reduction in rank to lieutenant commander and a transfer to a logistics position on a core world, where your tactical skills can be put to safer use. Alternatively, you can maintain your rank and command, but you will be assigned to deep reconnaissance missions in contested space. Alone. The meaning was clear. Take the demotion and spend the war shuffling supplies and safety, or keep her command and be sent on missions that were effectively suicide runs. They were offering her the choice between professional death and actual death. Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'll take the reconnaissance assignment, sir." Admiral Reyes looked surprised, as if he had expected her to choose the safer option. "Captain, I should explain that deep reconnaissance means operating behind enemy lines, often for months at a time, with no support and no backup. The casualty rate for such missions is significant." "I understand, sir. My crew and I accept the assignment." "Your crew?" Admiral Harrison laughed harshly. "Captain, you're being reassigned. Your current crew will remain on the Defiance for other duties. You'll be given a smaller ship and a minimal crew of volunteers." The blow hit Sarah harder than any criticism they had leveled at her during the hearing. Chief Rodriguez, Lieutenant Brooks, Ensign Patel, and the others had finally started to trust her, to work as a team. Now they were being scattered to the winds. 2 days later, Sarah stood in the docking bay looking at her new command. The Phantom was a stealth reconnaissance ship, barely a third the size of the Defiance. Its hull was covered in sensor-absorbing materials that gave it a matte black appearance, and its internal systems were designed for long-range operations with minimal crew. Her new crew consisted of 12 volunteers, most of whom she didn't recognize. As she reviewed their files, she realized why they had volunteered for what amounted to a suicide mission. Lieutenant James Park, her new executive officer, had been passed over for promotion 3 times despite excellent service records. Chief Engineer Emma Santos had been court-martialed for punching a superior officer who had taken credit for her work. Weapons Officer David Kim had a gambling problem that had landed him in debt to some very dangerous people. They were outcasts, just like her. People with nothing left to lose. "Captain," Lieutenant Park approached her in the docking bay. "The crew is assembled and ready for your inspection." Sarah nodded and followed him to where the 11 other crew members stood at attention. They were a diverse group, representing various specialties needed for long-range reconnaissance. As she looked at their faces, she saw the same mixture of desperation and determination that she felt in herself. "I'm not going to give you a speech about duty or honor," Sarah said, her voice carrying in the small space. "You all know why you're here. The military considers us expendable, suitable only for missions that no one expects us to survive. They're probably right about the odds." She paused, meeting each crew member's gaze. "But they're wrong about us. We're not here because we're failures. We're here because we're the kind of people who volunteer for impossible missions when someone needs to get the job done. In the next few months, we're going to prove that being underestimated is our greatest weapon." Chief Santos, a tough-looking woman with scarred hands, stepped forward. "What's the mission, Captain?" Sarah smiled grimly. "We're going hunting, Chief. While the main fleet prepares for defensive operations, we're going to slip behind enemy lines and make the Zephyrians pay for every system they take. We're going to hit their supply lines, gather intelligence on their fleet movements, and show them that humans don't just defend. We attack." The crew exchanged glances, and Sarah could see the spark of interest in their eyes. These weren't people who wanted safe assignments. They were fighters who had been sidelined by politics and bureaucracy. "Sir," Weapons Officer Kim spoke up, "the Phantom doesn't exactly have heavy armament. How are we supposed to take on Zephyrian ships?" "The same way I beat 15 ships with one at New Hebron," Sarah replied. "We outthink them, outmaneuver them, and hit them where they don't expect it. The Zephyrians have conquered dozens of species over the centuries. They're used to overwhelming force and direct confrontation. They're not used to fighting an enemy that adapts and improvises." Over the next week, Sarah pushed her new crew through intensive training exercises, learning their capabilities and building the kind of trust that could keep them alive in deep space. The Phantom systems were more advanced than anything she had worked with before, designed for stealth and endurance rather than direct combat. Their first mission briefing came from a junior intelligence officer who looked barely old enough to have graduated from the academy. Lieutenant Foster spread out star charts showing the contested border regions, marking known Zephyrian positions and suspected supply routes. "Your primary objective is intelligence gathering," Foster explained. "We need to know how many ships the Zephyrians have deployed, what their tactical doctrine involves, and how they're supplying their advanced forces." Sarah studied the charts, noting the patterns of Zephyrian expansion. "What about rules of engagement? Are we authorized to attack enemy vessels?" Foster looked uncomfortable. "Officially, you're to avoid contact unless absolutely necessary. Unofficially." He glanced around the room and lowered his voice. "Command knows that the only way to slow their advance is to disrupt their operations. Use your judgment, Captain." As the Phantom slipped away from the fleet base under cover of darkness, Sarah felt a familiar mix of excitement and fear. She was taking 12 people into hostile territory with minimal support and unclear orders. By any reasonable measure, it was insanity. But as she watched the stars wheel past on the main display, Sarah realized she had never felt more alive. For the first time since taking command, she was free to fight the war the way she knew it should be fought. The Zephyrians had made the mistake of underestimating humanity. They were about to learn that humans were at their most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. 6 weeks into their reconnaissance mission, the Phantom had become a ghost story among Zephyrian forces. Sarah and her crew had hit 12 supply convoys, destroyed 3 communication relay stations, and gathered intelligence that painted a disturbing picture of the enemy's true strength. The Zephyrian Empire wasn't just invading human space. They were preparing to erase humanity entirely. Intercepted communications spoke of cleansing operations and final solutions for the primitive primate species. The cold efficiency of genocide, planned and executed by beings who had perfected the art of extinction over millennia. Sarah sat in her captain's chair, studying the latest intelligence reports. The Phantom hung in the shadow of a dead asteroid, its stealth systems making it virtually invisible to enemy sensors. Her crew had adapted to their new reality with remarkable skill, learning to think and fight like guerrillas rather than traditional naval officers. "Captain," Lieutenant Park called from the communication station, "I'm picking up chatter from the Zephyrian fleet. Something big is happening." Sarah moved to look over his shoulder at the decoded transmissions. Her blood ran cold as she read the content. They're mobilizing their entire forward fleet. Target appears to be the Centauri system. The Centauri colonies were home to nearly 50 million humans, the largest population center outside Earth itself. If the Zephyrians took Centauri, they would control the primary jump routes to humanity's core worlds. It would be the beginning of the end. "How long until they reach Centauri?" Sarah asked. Park consulted his calculations. "At their current speed, approximately 72 hours, Captain." Sarah felt the weight of impossible decisions settling on her shoulders again. The Terran fleet was scattered across a dozen systems, trying to defend too many colonies with too few ships. By the time Command received her warning and assembled a defense force, Centauri would already be under attack. But the Phantom was just one small ship against a fleet of hundreds. What could they possibly do to stop such overwhelming force? "Chief Santos," Sarah called to her engineer, "how are our experimental modifications coming along?" Santos grinned, her scarred face lighting up with professional pride. "The quantum torpedo launcher is operational, Captain. We've got 6 shots before the system burns out, but each one packs about 10 times the punch of our regular weapons." The quantum torpedoes were Sarah's idea, a desperate modification that turned the Phantom's reconnaissance probes into devastating weapons by overloading their power cores. It was dangerous, unstable, and completely against regulations. In other words, perfect for their current situation. "Excellent. Mr. Kim, what's the status of our intelligence package?" Weapons Officer Kim looked up from his console. "All data compiled and ready for transmission, Captain. If we send it now, Command will have it in 18 hours. Sarah nodded, but her mind was racing through possibilities. 18 hours to receive the intelligence, another 12 to analyze it and formulate a response. Then at least 24 hours to assemble and deploy a defense force. Even if everything went perfectly, help would arrive too late. "Change of plans," Sarah announced, her voice carrying across the bridge. "We're not just sending intelligence back to Command. We're going to buy Centauri the time they need." The bridge fell silent. Lieutenant Park was the first to speak. "Captain, with respect, we're one ship against an entire fleet. The tactical odds are impossible." "The tactical odds were impossible at New Hebron too," Sarah replied. "But we won because we didn't fight the way they expected. We're not going to engage their fleet directly. We're going to make them come to us." She moved to the tactical display, highlighting key points in the Zephyrian advance route. "Look at their formation. They're moving in a standard conquest pattern, with their command ships in the center and support vessels spread out for maximum coverage. It's efficient, but it has a weakness." Chief Santos leaned forward, studying the display. "Their communication network. If we could disrupt the command links..." "Exactly. The Zephyrians rely on centralized command structures. Their fleet coordination depends on real-time communication between the command ships and their subsidiaries. If we can create enough chaos in their communications network, their advance will slow to a crawl while they try to re-establish control." Sarah began outlining her plan. It was audacious to the point of insanity, requiring precise timing and more luck than any reasonable person should expect. They would use the Phantom's stealth capabilities to infiltrate the enemy formation, then systematically destroy the communication relay ships that kept the fleet coordinated. "The beauty of it is that they won't know what's happening at first," Sarah explained. "Each relay ship that goes dark will look like a technical malfunction. By the time they realize they're under attack, we'll have crippled their coordination. And then they'll converge on our position and blow us into space dust," Park pointed out. "Not if we're not there when they arrive. We hit fast, move fast, and stay invisible. Guerrilla warfare in space." The crew spent the next 6 hours preparing for the mission. Sarah found herself thinking about the people she was trying to save. 50 million humans who had no idea that their lives hung in the balance. Children playing in colony parks, families sitting down to dinner, scientists working late in their laboratories, all of them depending on 13 misfits in a modified reconnaissance ship. As they approached the Zephyrian fleet, Sarah felt a familiar calm settle over her. This was what she had been born to do, she realized. Not to follow orders or climb the military hierarchy, but to stand between innocent people and those who would destroy them. "Stealth systems at maximum," reported Chief Santos. "We're as invisible as we're going to get." The Phantom slipped through the outer perimeter of the Zephyrian fleet like a shadow. Sarah watched the massive enemy ships drift past on her displays, their alien designs both beautiful and terrifying. Each vessel was larger than anything in the human fleet, armed with weapons that could crack planets and defended by shields that had never been penetrated. But they had blind spots, and Sarah had learned to exploit weaknesses that others couldn't see. "First target acquired," Kim reported. "Relay ship designated Tango 1, bearing 27 Mark IV. "Fire quantum torpedo," Sarah ordered. The Phantom shuddered slightly as the modified weapon launched. On the display, Sarah watched the torpedo streak through space and impact the relay ship's communication array. The explosion was brilliant but brief, and when it faded, the enemy vessel was drifting dead in space. "One down, 11 to go," Sarah murmured. "Take us to the next target." For the next 4 hours, the Phantom moved through the Zephyrian fleet like a predator stalking prey. Each relay ship they destroyed created growing confusion in the enemy formation. Ships began falling out of position, unable to receive coordination signals. Several minor collisions occurred as vessels tried to maintain formation without proper guidance. But Sarah knew their luck couldn't last forever. As they approached their 8th target, the enemy finally began to understand what was happening. "Captain, I'm detecting active scans across all frequencies," Park reported. "They're looking for us. How long until they locate us? Maybe 10 minutes if we're lucky." Sarah studied the tactical display, calculating distances and timing. They could hit 2 more relay ships before the Zephyrians pinpointed their location. It would have to be enough. Mr. Kim, prepare to fire both remaining quantum torpedoes simultaneously. "We're going to hit targets 9 and 10 at the same time. Then get out of here." The dual torpedo launch lit up the Phantom's position like a beacon, but it also devastated the enemy's remaining communication network. As the 2 relay ships exploded, the Zephyrian fleet began to break apart, ships scattering in all directions as local commanders lost contact with Central Command. "All ships, this is Admiral Zexkar." A transmission burst across all frequencies. The universal translator rendered the alien words in Sarah's earpiece. "We are under attack by cowardly human raiders. All vessels converge on coordinates 347 Mark 198 and destroy them." Sarah smiled grimly. The Zephyrian admiral sounded angry and frustrated, no longer the calm voice of assured victory. That was exactly what she had hoped for. "Chief, get us out of here. Maximum burn for the jump point." As the Phantom raced away from the disorganized fleet, Sarah transmitted their intelligence package to Terran Command. The Zephyrian advance had been delayed by at least 36 hours, maybe more. It wasn't victory, but it was hope. Behind them, the enemy fleet slowly began to regroup, but their momentum was broken. The surprise attack had cost them more than ships and equipment. It had cost them the psychological advantage of facing a helpless enemy. For the first time, the Zephyrians had been outfought by humans. And Sarah Chen, the young captain they had dismissed as expendable, had proven that sometimes the smallest force could achieve the greatest victories. The message from Terran Command arrived 3 days after the Phantom's attack on the Zephyrian fleet. Sarah read it twice, unable to believe what she was seeing. "Captain Sarah Chen, you are hereby ordered to report to Fleet Admiral Morrison aboard the flagship Aurora for immediate consultation. Your recent actions have been noted at the highest levels of command." Lieutenant Park whistled softly as he read over her shoulder. "Either we're getting medals or they're going to throw us in prison." Sarah wasn't sure which option frightened her more. The last time she had reported to senior command, they had essentially exiled her to a suicide mission. But her attack on the Zephyrian fleet had worked better than she had dared hope. The enemy advance on Centauri had been delayed by 4 days, giving the human defense fleet enough time to arrive and fortify the system. The rendezvous took place at Firebase Echo, a massive military installation built into an asteroid field near the front lines. As the Phantom docked with the Aurora, Sarah caught her first glimpse of humanity's newest flagship. The ship was enormous, bristling with weapons and armor that represented the best of human engineering. Fleet Admiral Morrison was waiting for her in his private conference room, along with several other officers Sarah didn't recognize. Morrison was an older man with steel-gray hair and the kind of weathered face that came from decades of military service. His reputation was legendary. He had commanded the fleet that stopped the Altarian rebellion and negotiated the peace treaty with the Rigel Consortium. Captain Chen, Morrison stood as she entered the room. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Sarah sat down carefully, trying to read the mood in the room. The other officers were studying her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright skepticism. She recognized Admiral Reyes from her court-martial, but the others were strangers. "Captain, I'll get straight to the point," Morrison began. "Your unauthorized attack on the Zephyrian fleet caused quite a stir. On one hand, you violated standing orders and engaged in reckless behavior that could have triggered a larger conflict. On the other hand, you single-handedly delayed a major enemy offensive and provided intelligence that has proven invaluable to our defensive planning." Sarah kept her expression neutral, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "The question before us today is simple," Morrison continued. "What do we do with an officer who achieves remarkable results through completely unorthodox methods?" Admiral Reyes leaned forward. "Sir, Captain Chen has a pattern of insubordination. Her actions, while successful, set a dangerous precedent for other officers who might decide to interpret their orders creatively. And yet," another officer interjected, "her tactics have proven more effective than our conventional approaches. The intelligence she gathered shows that the Zephyrians are using predictable conquest patterns that we can exploit." Morrison raised his hand for silence. "Captain Chen, I want to hear your assessment of the current situation. In your opinion, how should we proceed with this war?" Sarah took a deep breath. This was her chance to make her case, but she knew that speaking too boldly could end her career permanently. "Sir, the Zephyrians have conquered dozens of species over the centuries, using the same basic strategy. They overwhelm their enemies with superior numbers and technology, then absorb their resources and move on. They've perfected this approach because it works against conventional military forces." She paused, organizing her thoughts. "But humans don't fight conventionally. We adapt, we improvise, and we refuse to give up even when the odds are impossible. The Zephyrians are expecting us to meet them in pitched battles where their advantages matter most. Instead, we should be fighting a war of harassment and attrition." "Guerrilla warfare on an interstellar scale?" Morrison asked. "Exactly, sir. Small units operating independently, hitting supply lines and communication networks, forcing the enemy to spread their forces thin, trying to protect everything. We can't match their firepower, but we can make their occupation so costly that they decide humanity isn't worth the trouble." Admiral Reyes shook his head. "Captain, you're talking about abandoning entire systems to enemy occupation. The political cost would be enormous." "The political cost of losing the war would be higher, sir," Sarah replied. "The Zephyrians aren't interested in ruling us. Their intercepted communications make it clear that they plan to exterminate humanity entirely. This isn't a war for territory or resources. It's a war for survival." The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with new interest. "Captain, suppose I were to give you operational command of a special forces unit, carte blanche to implement these guerrilla tactics you're suggesting. What would you need?" Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "Fast ships, experienced crews willing to take risks, and the authority to operate behind enemy lines without waiting for approval from command. Most importantly, I'd need crews who understand that we're not trying to win battles. We're trying to win a war." Morrison nodded slowly. "The kind of crews that conventional commanders consider problems. Misfits and troublemakers who don't fit into traditional command structures." "Yes, sir. People like me and my current crew." One of the other officers, a woman with admiral's insignia that Sarah didn't recognize, spoke up. "Fleet Admiral, the captain's record speaks for itself. Her unconventional methods have achieved results that our traditional tactics have not. Perhaps it's time to try a different approach." Morrison stood up, moving to a large display showing the current tactical situation. Red symbols marked Zephyrian-controlled systems, while blue symbols showed human positions. The red was advancing steadily, overwhelming human defenses through sheer numbers. "Captain Chen, I'm going to take a gamble on you," Morrison said finally. "You'll be given command of Ghost Squadron, 12 ships and crews selected for their ability to operate independently. Your mission will be to establish a network of resistance cells in occupied territory and disrupt enemy operations however you see fit." Sarah felt a surge of excitement mixed with terror. This was everything she had hoped for and more. the chance to fight the war the way she knew it should be fought. Sir, what about operational authority? Will I have the freedom to make tactical decisions without approval from higher command? Morrison smiled grimly. Captain, once you're operating behind enemy lines, you'll be too far away for us to micromanage your decisions even if we wanted to. You'll have full tactical authority, with one understanding. You're accountable for results, not methods. Admiral Reyes looked uncomfortable with the arrangement. Sir, giving a junior officer that much autonomy sets a dangerous precedent. Admiral, we're fighting a war for humanity's survival, Morrison replied. Normal precedents don't apply. Captain Chen has proven that unconventional thinking can achieve exceptional results. I'm willing to bet that she and her Ghost Squadron can slow the Zephyrian advance enough for us to develop more permanent solutions. As the meeting concluded, Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had been given. 12 ships and their crews, the freedom to fight without interference, and the responsibility for potentially changing the course of the war. Captain, Morrison said as the other officers filed out, I want you to understand something. I'm not giving you this command because I think you're the best officer in the fleet. I'm giving it to you because you're the only officer who has consistently found ways to defeat superior forces. That's exactly what humanity needs right now. Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of his words. Sir, I won't let you down. I know you won't, Captain. Because if you do, we're all dead. As Sarah made her way back to the Phantom, she began mentally cataloging the officers and crews she would want for her squadron. Chief Rodriguez from the Defiance if she could get him. Lieutenant Park would definitely be her executive officer. And there were others scattered throughout the fleet. People who had been overlooked or sidelined because they didn't fit the traditional military model. The misfits and outcasts were about to become humanity's best hope for survival. And Sarah Chen, the young captain they had tried to exile, was going to lead them into the darkness between the stars to fight a war that conventional wisdom said couldn't be won. The Zephyrians had made one critical error in their calculations. They had assumed that humans would fight like every other species they had conquered. They were about to discover that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology or its numbers. It was its refusal to accept defeat, no matter how impossible the odds. 8 months after forming Ghost Squadron, Sarah stood on the bridge of her new flagship, the Wraith, watching Zephyrian reinforcements stream through a captured human system. Her 12 ships had become a legend among both human and alien forces, appearing without warning, striking with devastating precision, then vanishing before the enemy could respond. The squadron had evolved into something unprecedented in human military history. Each ship operated with complete autonomy, their crews trained to think like insurgents rather than traditional naval officers. They had developed their own tactical language, their own methods of coordination, and their own philosophy of warfare that prioritized results over regulations. Captain, we're detecting a high-value target in the enemy formation, reported Commander Park, who had become Sarah's most trusted lieutenant. Command ship configuration, heavily escorted. Sarah studied the tactical display, noting the distinctive energy signatures of Zephyrian command vessels. After months of fighting them, she had learned to read their formations like a book. This particular ship was broadcasting coordination signals to the entire fleet, a fleet admiral's flagship. That's not just any command ship, Sarah murmured. Look at the escort pattern. Triple redundancy, overlapping fields of fire, and there. She pointed to a specific formation of ships. Honor Guard configuration? We're looking at a sector commander at minimum, possibly a war marshal. The capture or destruction of a high-ranking Zephyrian officer would be a massive intelligence coup, but the target was protected by nearly 50 ships, all moving in perfect coordination through a system bristling with defensive installations. Captain, came a voice from behind her. Chief Rodriguez had transferred to the Wraith when Ghost Squadron was formed, bringing with him a corps of experienced personnel from the Defiance. That's a suicide run even by our standards, Sarah smiled grimly. Over the months, her relationship with her crew had evolved into something beyond traditional military hierarchy. They trusted her judgment implicitly, but they also felt free to challenge her when they thought she was being reckless. Not a direct assault. Chief, something more subtle. Sarah moved to the communication station. All Ghost ships, this is Wraith. Converge on my position but maintain stealth protocols. We're going hunting. Over the next hour, the 12 ships of Ghost Squadron slipped through the outer system, using asteroid fields and sensor shadows to avoid detection. Each captain had handpicked their crew from the misfits and outcasts of the human fleet, people who had been overlooked or dismissed by conventional commands. Captain Torres of the Spectre had been court-martialed for refusing to abandon wounded crew members during a pirate attack. Captain Wilson of the Shade had been passed over for promotion because she was too aggressive in her tactics. Captain Hassan of the Shadow had been disciplined for developing unauthorized modifications to his ship's weapons systems. They were exactly the kind of people Sarah needed for the impossible mission she was planning. All ships report ready. Captain, Park announced. Sarah activated the squadron-wide communication channel. Ghost Squadron, we have an opportunity to capture or eliminate a high-value enemy target. The risks are extreme, but the potential intelligence value is enormous. I'm not ordering anyone to participate. This is strictly volunteer. Captain Torres's voice crackled over the comm. With respect, when have any of us ever backed down from a challenge? Wraith, this is Shadow, Captain Hassan added. Just tell us what you need us to do. Sarah felt a surge of pride in her squadron. These were people who had been written off by the regular fleet, dismissed as problems and troublemakers. But they had become the most effective fighting force humanity had ever fielded. Here's the plan, Sarah began, outlining her strategy. It was audacious even by Ghost Squadron standards, requiring split-second timing and perfect coordination across 12 independent ships. They would create a cascade failure in the enemy's defensive network by simultaneously attacking key nodes in their formation. Each Ghost ship would target specific vessels whose destruction would create gaps in the Zephyrian defensive screen. The goal wasn't to destroy the entire fleet, but to create enough chaos to allow one ship, the Wraith, to slip through and capture the command vessel. The window will be maybe 30 seconds, Sarah explained. If we can't disable their command ship in that time, we abort and run. No heroics, no last stands, we hit hard and get out. The attack began at 0347 ship time. 12 stealth ships materialized throughout the Zephyrian formation, like ghosts becoming solid. Quantum torpedoes and plasma beams lanced out simultaneously, each shot carefully calculated to cripple rather than destroy. The enemy formation began to collapse as key vessels lost power or maneuvering capability. Ships collided with each other or spun out of control as their coordination networks failed. In the chaos, the Wraith slipped through the defensive screen like smoke through a broken window. Target acquired, announced Weapons Officer Kim. Firing boarding pods. The modified torpedo tubes launched specially designed pods that burned through the enemy ship's hull and deployed assault teams into its interior. Sarah had trained with each boarding team personally, teaching them Zephyrian ship layouts and the locations of critical systems. Boarding parties report successful penetration, came the voice of Marine Sergeant Collins over the comm, moving to secure the bridge and engineering. Sarah watched the tactical display as the Zephyrian fleet began to recover from the initial assault. Already enemy ships were moving to surround the Wraith and recapture their command vessel. How long until we're cut off? She asked Park. 6 minutes, maybe 7. Collins, you have 5 minutes to secure the target. After that, we're leaving with or without you. The next 5 minutes felt like hours. Sarah listened to the scattered reports from the boarding teams as they fought their way through the alien ship. The Zephyrians were fierce fighters, but they were unprepared for the close-quarters combat tactics that humans had perfected over centuries of warfare. Bridge secured, Collins finally reported. We have prisoners, including what looks like a high-ranking officer, preparing for extraction. All ghost ships, this is Wraith. Mission accomplished. Execute withdrawal plan Beta. The squadron scattered in all directions, each ship following pre-planned escape routes that would make pursuit impossible. The Wraith, carrying its precious cargo, jumped to a predetermined safe zone where Sarah could interrogate her prisoners. The Zephyrian officer was unlike anything Sarah had encountered before. Tall and elegant, with iridescent scales that shifted color in the light, the alien carried himself with the bearing of nobility. When he spoke, his words were translated by the ship's computer into precise formal English. I am War Marshal Kethvar of the 3rd Conquest Fleet, he said, his voice carrying no trace of fear or defeat. I demand to be treated according to the protocols of civilized warfare. Sarah studied him carefully. In 8 months of fighting, this was the highest-ranking Zephyrian she had encountered. The intelligence value of what he knew could change the course of the war. War Marshal, I am Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. You are my prisoner, and you will be treated humanely according to our military code. However, I need information about your fleet's strategic plans. Kethavar's scales shifted to a deeper blue color that Sarah had learned indicated amusement. You expect me to betray my empire to a primitive species that barely understands the concept of interstellar civilization? I expect you to recognize that this war is not going the way your empire planned, Sarah replied. Your forces have been stalled for months. Your supply lines are under constant attack, and now one of your war marshals has been captured by the primitive species you're trying to exterminate. For the first time, Sarah saw something like uncertainty flicker in the alien's large, dark eyes. You are not what we expected. Our intelligence indicated that humans fight in predictable patterns, that your military follows rigid hierarchies and conventional tactics. Your intelligence was wrong, Sarah said simply. We adapt, we improvise, and we never give up, no matter how hopeless the situation appears. Kethavar was silent for a long moment, studying Sarah with obvious interest. How old are you, human captain? 20. The war marshal's scale shifted through several colors in rapid succession, an expression Sarah recognized as extreme surprise. Impossible. No species develops competent military commanders at such a young age. Most species probably don't need to, Sarah replied. We've been fighting wars for our entire recorded history. Combat leadership isn't something we learn in schools. It's something we inherit from thousands of generations of warriors. As the interrogation continued, Sarah began to understand why the Zephyrian Empire had been so successful for so long. They were methodical, efficient, and overwhelmingly powerful, but they were also predictable, following conquest patterns that had worked for centuries against species that fought conventional wars. Humans, however, didn't fight conventional wars. They fought desperate wars, improvised wars, wars where the impossible became routine and defeat was just another obstacle to overcome. War Marshal Kethavar was beginning to understand that his empire had made a critical error in judgment. They had invaded the territory of a species that treated warfare not as a profession, but as an art form, and one at which they had become very, very good. The young captain sitting across from him represented something new in his empire's long history of conquest. She was proof that humanity would not be easily exterminated, and that the war his leaders had expected to win in months might instead drag on for years. For the first time since the invasion began, a Zephyrian war marshal was beginning to doubt that his empire would achieve victory. 2 years after the first battle at New Hebron, Sarah stood in the observation deck of Firebase Alpha, watching the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled, prepare for what many believed would be the final battle of the war. The intelligence extracted from War Marshal Kethavar had revealed the location of the Zephyrian Empire's primary staging area, a massive installation in the Vega system where their entire invasion force was concentrated at 21. Sarah now commanded not just Ghost Squadron, but an entire tactical division consisting of 47 ships and over 15,000 personnel. Her unconventional methods had been adopted throughout the fleet, transforming the Terran military from a defensive force into an aggressive, adaptive fighting machine. Admiral, Commander Park approached her, using the rank she had earned through a combination of battlefield promotions and political necessity. The final briefing is about to begin. Sarah nodded but continued watching the fleet. In the 2 years since Ghost Squadron's formation, the war had transformed from a one-sided conquest into a grinding stalemate. The Zephyrians still controlled significant territory, but their advance had been stopped and in some sectors reversed. Humanity had learned to fight asymmetrically, using speed and unpredictability to offset the enemy's technological advantages, but the cost had been enormous. Dozens of colonies lay in ruins. Millions of humans had died, and the survivors were exhausted by constant warfare. Both sides were reaching the limits of their endurance, making this final assault either humanity's greatest victory or its last desperate gamble. The briefing room was packed with officers representing every ship in the assault fleet. Fleet Admiral Morrison, now showing his age after 2 years of commanding a desperate war effort, stood before a massive tactical display showing the Vega system. Ladies and gentlemen, Morrison began. In 18 hours, we will commence Operation Final Strike. Our objective is the complete destruction of the Zephyrian staging facility and the elimination of their remaining invasion fleet. Sarah studied the intelligence imagery showing the enemy installation. It was truly massive, a space-based fortress that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. Hundreds of ships surrounded it, creating defensive layers that seemed impenetrable. The primary assault will be led by Battle Group Alpha, consisting of our heaviest ships and most experienced crews, Morrison continued. Their job is to draw enemy attention and create openings for our specialist units. He turned to look directly at Sarah. Admiral Chen, your tactical division will be responsible for penetrating the enemy's inner defenses and destroying the facility's core systems. Intelligence suggests that the Zephyrians are preparing for a final offensive that would overwhelm our remaining defenses. We cannot allow that fleet to launch. Sarah stood, acknowledging the responsibility. Understood, sir. My ships are ready. As the briefing continued, Sarah found herself thinking about how much had changed since her early days as an outcast cadet. The officers around her no longer looked at her with skepticism or disdain. Instead, she saw respect, trust, and in some cases, the kind of reverence usually reserved for legendary commanders. Her tactical innovations had become standard doctrine throughout the fleet. Her former crew members now commanded their own ships, spreading her methods throughout the service. Most importantly, her philosophy of adaptive warfare had transformed how humanity approached conflict, turning a species known for stubborn defense into masters of aggressive improvisation. After the briefing, Sarah made her way through the fleet, visiting each of her ships and speaking with their crews. These were no longer the misfits and outcasts of her early command. They were elite units handpicked for their ability to operate in impossible situations. But they still maintained the spirit of improvisation and calculated recklessness that had made Ghost Squadron legendary. On the bridge of the Wraith, now redesigned as a command ship, Sarah assembled her senior officers for final preparations. The familiar faces of Park, Rodriguez, and Kim were joined by newer additions, officers who had proven themselves in the crucible of asymmetric warfare. People, Sarah began. In a few hours, we're going to attempt something that conventional military wisdom says is impossible. We're going to take 47 ships into the heart of the most heavily defended installation in known space, and we're going to destroy it. She paused, looking at each officer in turn. 2 years ago, they told us we were expendable. They said we were suitable only for suicide missions that no one expected us to survive. They were wrong about the suicide part, but they were right about one thing. We are the people you send when the mission is impossible. Chief Rodriguez, now wearing the insignia of a senior Master Chief, smiled grimly. Admiral, we've been making impossible missions look routine for 2 years. I don't see any reason to stop now. The assault began with a massive barrage from the human fleet's heavy ships. Dreadnoughts and battle cruisers unleashed everything in their arsenals, creating a wall of destructive energy that hammered against the Zephyrian defensive perimeter. It was a conventional attack, the kind of frontal assault that military academies taught and enemy commanders expected, which was exactly why Sarah's forces were approaching from an entirely different direction. Using a complex series of micro-jumps and sensor masking techniques, her tactical division had positioned itself in the shadow of Vega's primary star. The stellar radiation provided perfect cover for their approach, making them invisible to enemy sensors until they were practically on top of their targets. All ships. This is Wraith, Sarah broadcast on the tactical frequency. Execute Phantom Protocol. 47 ships materialized within the Zephyrian defensive perimeter simultaneously, appearing like ghosts from the stellar background. The enemy's outer defensive layer had been designed to prevent frontal assault, not to deal with forces that appeared in their midst without warning. Sarah's ships moved with lethal precision, each one targeting specific components of the massive installation. They had studied the facility's structure for months, identifying critical systems and planning their attack down to the second. Primary power grid targeted, reported Captain Hassan from the shadow. Firing now. Defensive command center engaged, added Captain Torres from the Spectre. Target neutralized. The installation began to break apart under the coordinated assault. Without its defensive grid, the facility was helpless against the human fleet's long-range bombardment. Secondary explosions rippled through the structure as critical systems overloaded and failed. But the Zephyrians were not helpless. Their remaining ships turned inward, converging on Sarah's forces with overwhelming firepower. She had expected this, planned for it, but the reality was still terrifying. Hundreds of enemy vessels surrounded her relatively small force, their weapons creating a deadly crossfire that few ships could survive. "Admiral," Park called out, "the Nemesis and the Phantom have taken critical damage. Captain Wilson is requesting permission to withdraw." Sarah studied the tactical display, calculating odds and possibilities. They had achieved their primary objective. The installation was doomed. But getting her ships out alive would require one more impossible maneuver. All ships implement dispersal pattern Omega, break formation and execute random jump protocols. Rendezvous at Rally Point Charlie in 6 hours. Her ships scattered in all directions, each following a different escape route that made pursuit impossible. It was controlled chaos, the kind of tactical flexibility that conventional military doctrine couldn't counter. As the Wraith jumped to safety, Sarah watched the Zephyrian installation collapse in on itself, its death throes visible across the entire star system. The enemy's invasion fleet was trapped, cut off from their supply lines and staging areas. Without the facility's support systems, they would be forced to withdraw or face annihilation. The war wasn't over, but this battle had broken the back of the Zephyrian offensive. For the first time in 2 years, humanity could think about something other than mere survival. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the same observation deck where she had watched the fleet prepare for Operation Final Strike. But now she was watching Zephyrian ships arriving under a flag of truce, their formations disciplined but no longer threatening. War Marshal Kethvar, now serving as a diplomatic envoy, approached her with something that might have been respect in his alien features. "Admiral Chen," he said, his scales shifting to colors that indicated formal acknowledgement. "My government wishes to discuss terms for a cessation of hostilities." Sarah turned to face him, noting the formal military salute he offered, a gesture that would have been unthinkable when he was her prisoner. "War Marshal, I'm authorized to participate in preliminary discussions, but any formal treaty will need to be negotiated by civilian authorities." Kethvar's scales shifted to a pattern Sarah had learned indicated thoughtful consideration. "Admiral, if I may ask, how did you know? How did you predict our tactical responses so accurately?" Sarah smiled slightly. "Because your empire has been using the same basic strategy for centuries. You overwhelm primitive species with superior technology and numbers, then move on to the next conquest. It works beautifully against conventional opponents." "But humans are not conventional opponents," Kethvar observed. "No," Sarah agreed. "We've been fighting each other for so long that we've learned to adapt to any situation. When you invaded, you expected us to fight like the other species you've conquered. Instead, we fought like humans, unpredictably, desperately, and with complete disregard for conventional military wisdom." As the peace negotiations continued over the following weeks, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had started as an outcast cadet, dismissed as too young and inexperienced for real command. The military establishment had tried to sideline her, then exile her, then use her as a disposable asset for impossible missions. But they had made a critical error. They had underestimated not just her capabilities, but the potential of everyone they had dismissed as problems and misfits. The people they had written off as failures had become humanity's greatest strength. The final ceremony took place on the flagship Aurora, with representatives from both species signing the formal peace treaty. As Sarah watched the proceedings, she realized that the young fighter who had been laughed at and dismissed had become something no one had expected, a commander respected by both friend and enemy, a leader who had helped save her species from extinction. War Marshal Kethvar approached her after the ceremony, offering one final salute. "Admiral Chen," he said formally, "it has been an honor to face you in combat. Your species' capacity for adaptive warfare is remarkable." Sarah returned the salute, understanding the significance of the gesture. She had earned not just victory, but the professional respect of an enemy who had conquered dozens of other species. "The honor was mutual, War Marshal. Perhaps now both our peoples can learn to adapt to peace as effectively as we adapted to war." As the Zephyrian delegation departed, Sarah stood watching their ships disappear into the depths of space. The young fighter who had been dismissed as expendable had become the commander who helped end the war. She had proven that being underestimated was sometimes the greatest advantage of all. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years it was a future humanity would survive to see. And that, Sarah reflected, was worth any amount of laughter and dismissal she had endured along the way.